What turns a millionaire's daughter into an armed bank robber? That was the question on everyone's mind after 5 people stormed a San Francisco bank on April 15, 1974, with rifles raised and zero hesitation. As the group forced tellers to empty their drawers, one woman smiled as she pointed her rifle at the cowering customers. Some witnesses said she looked like the one in charge. And then came the shock. She looked exactly like the kidnapped daughter of media titan William Randolph Hearst. So, what really happened to Patty Hearst? To find that out, we need to go back to the beginning. Under George Hearst, a mining magnate and politician, the Hearst family quickly became the creme de la creme of Americanized society. His son, William Randolph, who built a media empire, was a man of dubious ethics and seemingly entirely motivated by financial greed. This would make him the inspiration for the classic movie Citizen Kane. He was a deeply controversial figure, a staunch nationalist and proud isolationist. While he championed working-class causes, his fierce anti-communist views led him to openly praise the Nazi Party and its leader Adolf Hitler. The two men even met in 1934, when William and his eldest son George traveled to Berlin to interview Hitler. While William would later walk back his admiration, in the early 1930s his views led him to publicly praise the virtues of Nazism, framing it as the force that crushed communism. As we said, he was deeply controversial, and make no mistake, his reputation would cast a long shadow when 4 decades later his granddaughter was caught on camera robbing a bank with violent communists. William Randolph Hearst had 5 sons, and one of them, Randolph Apperson Hearst, was the father of Patricia, Patty. She was a good-looking girl, an heiress to a fortune, and the absolute epitome of privilege. At 19, she was a sophomore at UC Berkeley studying art history and living in a plush apartment. On the evening of February 4, 1974, she was at home with her fiancé, Stephen Weed. They were snuggled up on the couch, having just eaten and settling in to watch TV. Then the doorbell rang. It was around 9 p.m., late for a house call. Patty was uneasy. Something didn't feel right. When Steve got up to answer the door, Patty caught a glimpse of a bulky figure through the frosted glass pane. She was just about to tell him to slide the chain lock on, but he opened the door instead. Patty was hiding in the hallway when she heard an agitated female. The unexpected visitor said that she'd just been in a car accident and asked to use the phone. The next thing Patty heard was a scuffle at the door. She backed into the kitchen just as 2 armed men burst in. One was black, the other was a short, stocky white man. A young woman followed close behind. The white man slammed Patty to the floor, yelling at her to keep her head down. The other man swept through the apartment, demanding to know where the safe was. After all, this was the daughter of one of the richest families in the world. But Patty didn't have a safe. Steve, now injured, offered his wallet. Anything to get them out of there. But this wasn't a robbery. Not exactly. They gagged and blindfolded Patty, still in her bathrobe, and dragged her outside. She couldn't see a thing. And then she heard a door open. The neighbors, followed by the sudden crack of machine gun fire and the sound of shattering glass. Her blindfold came off and she saw that she was about to be shoved into the backseat floor area of a station wagon, and she started to cry. The black guy yelled at her to shut up or they would blow her head off. It wasn't until they'd been driving for miles that Patty finally dared to speak. She asked what they wanted, and the answer came cold and flat. They weren't going to kill her. She was worth more to them alive. It was only hours later, at a dirty old house where she was being held, that she fully understood what was going on. The same black guy walked into the room and announced, "You are a prisoner of war for the Symbionese Liberation Army. You will be held in protective custody, and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention governing prisoners of war." The next morning, the San Francisco Chronicle ran the story with the headline, "Hearst's daughter kidnapped by 3 armed commandos." It was huge news, global news, and 3 days later the world found out who had done it. For many, it was the first time they'd ever heard the name Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA, a small far-left extremist group with a hideout not far from where Patty had been taken. As urban guerrillas, they called for a multiracial society without classes, where people lived in perfect symbiosis, but only after a lot of violence. They also said that they wanted to, quote, "unite all oppressed people into a fighting force and to destroy the capitalist state." They sent a letter to a Berkeley radio station stating that Patty Hearst was now a prisoner of war. Given the group's far-left ideology and the Hearst family's legacy of nationalism, Nazi sympathies, and staggering wealth, Patty wasn't just a hostage, she was a very valuable, symbolic asset. The SLA had just hit the jackpot. But who were they? The organization was the result of a prisoner outreach program in the early 70s led by black inmates who worked closely with white activists. Their figurehead was Donald DeFreeze, a dedicated criminal and quasi-Marxist philosopher who'd escaped from prison in 1973. It was in the Prisoner Outreach Project that he met Willie Wolfe, the white guy that Patty had said was short and stout, a man whose upper-middle-class life was much closer to Patty's existence than DeFreeze's. The FBI's wanted poster remarked that DeFreeze was to be considered armed and extremely dangerous. It was clearly the only part of the group with street cred. It was during this time in hiding that he met up with Patricia Mizmoun Sotichik, another co-founder of the SLA, and Veitziendub with Nancy Ling Perry and Camilla Christine Hall. This was a ragtag bunch of posh activists, not exactly the kind of people who would usually elicit fear. Before Nancy Perry got involved, she'd been a middle-class astrology-loving, weed-smoking street hustler who occasionally dealt blackjack in San Francisco's North Beach dives. Patricia Soltishik, who likewise decried capitalism, was one of capitalism's success stories. She grew up entrenched in the upper middle class, an honor student in high school who in her spare time trained dogs for the blind. Still, Camilla Candy Hall had not been blessed with the same comforts. She lost her 3 siblings to congenital diseases when she was still young, and also lost her mother at an early age. Much of her childhood was spent traveling through Africa and South America, where her father, a Lutheran minister, offered support to communities living in poverty far deeper than most Americans could imagine. But Donald DeFreeze knew poverty. He'd grown up among 8 siblings in a house where his nurse mother struggled to hold things together. His father was a violent drunk, always quick to raise his hands, once breaking both of Donald's arms in what was a tempestuous telling off. Donald ran away from home at 14 and soon found himself in New York City and Buffalo leading a life of crime. He had a thing for weapons, including bombs, once getting off with a suspended sentence on a weapons charge where it's believed he informed the police. It's now understood that he was a regular informant in those days, but after a shootout with cops in 1969, he got 6 to 14 years. He found himself inside a very politicized prison system where he honed his Marxist revolutionary ideas. Through the Prisoner Outreach Program, he met Wolfe, along with the Black Panther, Theodore Wheeler, and they all formed the SLA. So, with the rich girl Patty as a prime bargaining chip, the SLA started making demands. They wanted the Hearst family to give $70 million and foodstuffs to the needy across California. It's not exactly known how much the Hearsts were worth, but when William Hearst died in 1951, he left $200 million, about $1.5 billion today. By the 1970s, they'd have been worth many billions, so how much was Patty worth? Apparently enough. Randolph agreed to pay. He negotiated a deal offering $2 million instead, which is about $14.5 million in today's money. This was quite a chunk of the family fortune, which made it all the more shocking when just weeks later his daughter showed up on security footage, aiming a rifle at terrified customers. What could have happened? It was now April, just 2 months since she'd been kidnapped in February. But in that short time, Patty Hearst had gone from heiress to revolutionary, now calling herself Tanya, a name taken from Tamara Bunta, the far-left feminist and guerrilla fighter who was Che Guevara's right-hand woman. Let's just add here that even though this was pre-MK Ultra leaks, America was already obsessed with brainwashing. Behind closed doors, the CIA was flooding test subjects with LSD, trying to manipulate their minds and provoke criminal behavior. Meanwhile, the government publicly claimed that American POWs in Korea who defected to the communist side had been brainwashed by their captors. Back then, brainwashing was everywhere, in the headlines, in politics, in pop culture. So, had Patty been brainwashed? That's exactly what the Hearst family said had happened. After the SLA released a tape recording of Patty speaking, she claimed that she was given 2 options: she could be killed or instead join the forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army. Before this, the media had said that the other members had been pointing their guns at Patty, proof that she was the victim. But in that same tape, Patty said her comrades had definitely not pointed guns at her, and the security tape showed that. She added, for good measure, that her ex-fiancé was a sexist, ageist pig, and that she didn't care if she ever saw him again. She also added that the ruling class didn't want to believe that she was now a revolutionary, but that she did believe that the fascist dictatorship of America had to be brought down, and that would mean the use of guns. The Hearst family responded that she was still the victim, that she was under the influence of those very bad people, either slightly brainwashed or had been forced to say those things to save her life. The U.S. public